we're only meant to be around for a little while, so next time.
Welcome back to the Undeserving podcast, where Josh and I talk about things related to theology, maybe some gaming, maybe some comics. It's been a while. We got stuck in a time loop, and we're back.
Yes, we wandered through the plains of time and found ourselves here 2 months in the future. Yes. 3 months in the future, however long it's been since our last upload.
Yes.
Woody, how have you been, man? It's been a while. It's been since before Christmas since we've uploaded anything.
It's been good. I mean, I got stuck in a time loop, so...
Yeah, wandering the infinite void.
It's like, where am I? What's going on?
Searching for purpose and hope.
Good thing I found some right here. Ooh, that was corny.
Boo. Boo, he never uploads to his main channel anymore. Oh, well, since it's been before Christmas since we've uploaded, I guess I have to ask, how was your Christmas? We've seen each other since then, but for the sake of the audience, how was Christmas?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Did you get everything your little heart desires?
I didn't ask for much, so yeah, I guess.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Pretty busy. Had to have Christmas with two families, so first it was at my family, then it was back to Addie's family, and then it was back to my family again. So It was a fun, busy day.
Nice. Glad to hear it, man. Good. Well, for those of you who were wondering, no, the Undeserving podcast didn't die. We kind of just took an unscheduled break because holidays are busy, especially for people who work in ministry or assist ministries like Woody does, or I do, or my wife does, or Woody's significant other does. So we just took some time to relax and recharge, and we're back, and probably not better than ever, but we're going to do the best we can. So Woody, what are we doing today?
Today we are continuing our series in Hosea. Feels like it has been months.
It has been months. You guys thought that we were going to do new year, new subject, but you were wrong.
Back to Hosea.
Right. All right. So, Hosea chapter 8. Let's get into it. Woody, do you want to read first, or shall I?
Sure, I'll read the first 7. You can read the last 7.
Oh, sweet. Perfect split.
Exactly. All right. Set the trumpet to your lips. One like a vulture is over the house of the Lord, because they have transgressed my covenant and rebelled against my law. To me they cry, my God, we Israel know you. Israel has spurned the good, the enemy shall pursue him. They made kings, but not through me. They set up princes, but I knew it not. With their silver and gold they made idols for their own destruction. I have spurned your calf, O Samaria. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? For it is from Israel a craftsman made it. It is not God. The calf of Samaria shall be broken to pieces. For they sow the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. The standing grain has no heads. It shall yield no flour, as if it were to yield, strangers would devour it.
Israel is swallowed up. Already they are among the nations as a useless vessel. For they have gone up to Assyria, a wild donkey wandering alone. Ephraim has hired lovers. Though they hire allies among the nations, I will soon gather them up, and the king and princes shall soon writhe because of the tribute. Because Ephraim has multiplied altars for sinning, they have become to him altars for sinning. Were I to write for him my laws by the 10,000s, they would be regarded as a strange thing. As for my sacrificial offerings, they sacrifice meat and eat it, but the Lord does not accept them. Now he will remember their iniquity and punish their sins. They shall return to Egypt. For Israel has forgotten his Maker and built palaces, and Judah has multiplied fortified cities. So I will send a fire upon his cities, and it shall devour her strongholds.
Grim.
Yeah, no, it is not looking good here. It is not looking good here at all.
Oh, Israel, when will you ever learn?
It's still a while till they do. It's still a while till they do, sadly. So, let's hop back up to the top here and we'll start going through this.
Yes, sir.
So, what's standing out to you in the first couple verses, Woody?
Well, I think the first verse is pretty self-explanatory. We've seen this as a constant theme throughout this entire book. We obviously know that Israel has transgressed God's covenant. They've broken his law and have gone their own way. But what's interesting to me is verse 2 when he says, "To me they cry, my God, we Israel know you." And this is obviously ironic because Israel is claiming to know God. You know, you have this idea of syncretism, that they're trying to worship God, but then other gods too, as you can see also in this chapter. But if they truly knew God, they would have known his statutes and what he hates, and that is idolatry, right? So it's very obvious they don't know God. They've wandered away. And it says in the very next verse, like, Israel has spurned the good, and because of this, their enemy shall pursue them.
Right. Yeah, and this is... And we've talked about this before while going through Hosea. This is something Israel has struggled with forever, basically since their inception as a people group. As soon as they were out in the wilderness and Moses was up on the mountain for just a little bit too long, first thing they did, hey Aaron, you should make us an idol. And I was just reading through that passage the other day, and it just makes me laugh reading through that again, because Aaron was like complete different tangent, but it just makes me laugh, because Aaron was like, "Oh, hey, Moses, yeah, crazy thing. I threw the gold in the fire, and this calf just jumped out. I didn't even touch it, man." Like, I just wish I had the ability to go back in time. Maybe the time rift can open up again for us so that we can travel, but I would have loved to see Moses' reaction to that. Just be like, "Really, Aaron? Just you threw it in and a cow just jumped out?
It just came out like that.
Huh? You didn't lay a hammer?
What a miracle!"
You didn't lay a hammer or a tool to it, huh?
Is that a chisel and a hammer I see?
With gold on it? What you talking about?
Just puts his hands behind his back? No.
No. Is that gold dust on your fingers? Nah. It's platinum.
When you laugh at Israel for their constant abandoning of God and then realize you're Israel every time you choose sin over God.
Oh. Oof. And, well, yeah, and we laugh about that, but Jesus sends the same warning. And we talk about this all the time too, but it's the scariest verse in the Bible that Jesus says there's going to be a day where people come up to me and they say, "Lord, in your name we did this and all this stuff, all these good works in your name," and Jesus is going to look at them and say, "Get away from me, I don't know you. You never knew me, I never knew you." And it's a repeat. It's scary.
Yes, I mean, you see all the time, like, people... And you see it, especially today, of people who kind of chase this like emotional high from church or worship services or whatever, saying like, "Oh, like, just having like all this emotion and like no substance in church whatsoever, and no interest in talking about the Bible, no interest in the things of God." And they're saying, I know God. And it's like, then, like, your fruit doesn't show it.
Yeah. Like, and it's such a sad state that I feel like that's what a lot of modern Christianity has become. It's this chasing of the next spiritual high. It's never an effort to keep that relationship going. Let's dialogue on that, actually, because what should the Christian relationship look like? Do you think it should always feel like some sort of spiritual high? Because I don't think it needs to. No,
it doesn't. And, of course, this isn't to say that there's no emotion that comes with, like, Christianity, and there's no emotion, like, dwelling and meditating on the gospel. That's not what we're saying. Because, I mean, I often have, moments in my spiritual walk where I do get very emotional, like, thinking about all that God has done for me and, the great news of salvation. But it's not all that. Like, you're not every single moment of your Christian life is going to be emotional. There's times where you're studying the Word of God and you don't feel anything.
Right.
Like, that happens.
Right.
There's times where I'm in church and I really don't feel anything, and sometimes I should, and I don't. That's not to say that you should never feel anything, but Christianity is highs and lows.
Right.
You read the psalmists, and they're not always on a spiritual high. Like, you're not always reading praise psalms. A lot of times you're seeing psalms that say, like, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Right.
Or, Psalm 51 is my favorite psalm, right? It's like, why are you cast down in my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? It's like, so, like, yes, it's being aware that, you're, like, he's even aware, like, even in that psalm, it's like his emotions aren't his guide. Like,
right.
Like,
right.
he knows that, like, it feels like God's abandoned him, but it's not true.
Right.
It's like, it's so, like, in the, elsewhere, is it Jeremiah or, no, yeah. I don't remember. But, like, there's a proverb that says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding.
Right.
And there's a way that seems right to his man, but the way ends in death, right?
Right.
So, no, I don't. I think the Christian life is highs and lows. It's sometimes it's emotion, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's purely intellectual. Sometimes it's just faithfully trusting God like a child, right?
Right. Yeah, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I sometimes look at, I think it's a lot like any other relationship sometimes. Like, when I first started dating Jules, my wife, yeah, like, it was like, whoo, like, emotion running high every time I saw her. It was like, max gear shift every time, like, not to say, like, I don't get excited every time I see her, or, like, I'm not still enthralled by her presence, but there's almost, like, a normalcy of life that happens. Like, those emotions aren't just, like, full throttle every time. The Christian life isn't necessarily meant to be like that, or isn't always like that either. Like, you get into this relationship with Christ, and when you're doing that for so long, it doesn't need to constantly be this emotional high or low. It's kind of the same thing. Like, you have this sense of normalcy. You're in this sense of comfort with Christ.
Yeah, and I think, even though Addie and I have not been dating as long as you guys have been married, but, like,
you're welcome for that, by the way.
Thank you. Another time. But I can attest to that. As, like, the first, like, few weeks, like, month or two, is just, like, it's constant, like, just, like, high, like, good emotions is like, oh, like, like, all the lovey-dovey stuff. And it's not that, like, we don't still feel that way. We definitely do, but it's just, like, it's not going to be like that all the time. You're not always going to be feeling, like super high emotion every time you see your significant other. It's, like, the same way with God. Is, like, I think sometimes, like, it's like a marriage, right? Your marriage covenant. You first begin with your relationship with the Lord. It's, like, very high emotion, I think, at first for a lot of us.
Right.
And it's like, but it doesn't stay like that. It's like any marriage is, like, it has its ups and downs, right?
Right.
So I think it's very practical in that sense. Is with any relationship, it's like, even though, like, might be high emotions at first, it's like, it's not going to stay like that forever. And that's not to say that won't happen again, but
yeah, and I always used to hear an analogy, and I don't know how good of an analogy it is, so go ahead and call me a heretic, or maybe our editor can just throw a huge, like, bigoted heretic button on my face if I say this. But I had
Photoshop Arius onto him.
Yeah, just, like, lower a 666 over my head or something. But I had a friend describe it to me once, but he basically said, like, your Christian relationship with Christ is like it's basically like your training wheel set with your dad or your whoever teaches you ride a bike. Like, you take the training wheels off, and they're there holding the bike for you at first, and you're like, hey, don't let go, and it's like, hey, don't worry, I'm still here, and, like, for sure that, like, they're definitely there, and you're going on your own for a bit, and it's like, oh, I'm doing it, and it's like, you look back, and it's like, oh, they let go of the bike, but, like, they're still walking right beside you, and it's like, hey, look, see, you're doing it, like, hey, you got this, but I'm still here.
You thought that was heresy?
I don't know, dude. Sometimes some people are like, oh, no, well, technically.
fact check the theology real quick.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for somebody to come into the comments and be like, technically God always has a hand on us, so...
Well, Jehovah's Witness will come in the comment and be like, actually, God's not personal, so...
Yeah. So, after that tangent, where are we? Verse 4. Yeah, so, they made kings, but not through me. They set up princes, but I knew it not. So this is obviously talking about how God's original design for Israel was never for them to have a king. And it just harkens back to that part in those chapters in 1 Samuel where like God would send judges to help lead the people, but correct me if I'm wrong, but it was definitely more of a is theocracy the right term? Government by God?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, it was definitely more of a theocracy. Like God was the one who got like the absolute final say. He always has the absolute final say. But by the time of the end of Judges and going into 1 Samuel, everybody was like, no, we want a king like the nations around us. And God was like, okay, fine. I mean, if that's what you really want. It's a dumb idea, but if that's what you really want.
Yeah, and I think this also kind of tackles, like, the political sphere in general in Israel is, like, honestly, beginning with Solomon and after is, like, the Israel's turned into a political mess. It was like they were trying to constantly, like, create allies and all these assassinations were happening because they were trying to, like, strengthen themselves as a country, or as a nation, I'm sorry. But this is very clearly saying is, like, they're relying so much on their own power and on their political atmosphere and not relying on God as they should have, because you could see in the beginning is, like, it is God who got them all this land to begin with.
Right.
During Joshua's conquest, right?
Right. And I just like to throw this out in case somebody thinks that they got God in a gotcha situation. They set up princes, but I knew it not. This is not God saying, oh, I didn't know they set up princes. This is just... The translation is more akin to, like, I'm not recognizing it.
Right.
Like, yeah, that's a prince, sure, by your standard. I don't recognize that prince has any power. Mm-hmm. Because by this point in Israel's history, like you were saying, I think Solomon, who was the first king? Saul. I think Saul, David, and Solomon were the only kings who were actually anointed by a prophet. And then, like, God's chosen kings for Israel. And then after that, it kind of went off the deep end. People were just kind of being thrown in there. So after that, like, everything after that, none of those kings were put in there by because God actually wanted them in there. Like, not necessarily. They were in there because God wanted them in there. He allowed them to be in there, but they weren't put in there the proper way.
Right, it was David's line, but, they were never, like, they didn't fear the Lord.
Right.
Besides, like, Hezekiah and Josiah.
The very few good kings who eventually screwed up anyway.
Right. Yes. I think it's interesting here. He says, I have spurned your calf, O Samaria. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? And it's like there's so much to unpack in just that one verse there.
Yeah.
I spurned your calf. So, like, that's the idea that we've talked about is, like, Israel was relying on their sacrifices and what they offered to God to atone for their sins. Is like, yes, but under the Old Covenant, that was only one part of it. It was still, like, yes, animal sacrifices were the symbolic atonement for their sins. Is like, but what really atoned for their sins was always Christ.
Right.
They didn't know him yet, but it was faith in the coming Messiah and faith in God alone, right?
Right.
It's like, this obviously, these Israelites obviously weren't showing their faith because we know that people who have faith in God are ones who are obeying God. Remember in the Old Covenant, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness.
Right.
But we look at that and like, oh, see, like, he just had faith. It's like, but what did he do with that faith? He
acted on it.
He acted on it, right?
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, this is a great example of something we've talked about all throughout this series, and we've brought up the psalm a million times. But this is the classic example of people always saying like, oh well, it was just burn a calf and you're good in the old system. It was not just burning a calf. It was God is still looking at your heart. You can burn a calf all you want. Like, if your heart's not in the right place, God's not accepting that offering. At the end of the day, you still had to be repentant of your sin. And that's what he's saying. Like, these people are bringing him their calf, thinking, this is my get-out-of-jail-free card. This is them trying to pass go and collect $200. And this is God saying, no, forget that. Go straight to hell.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting, like, this last line here is like, he says, how long will they be incapable of innocence?
Yeah.
And it's just like, they're not able to do anything pleasing to him.
Yeah,
like,
and that's a strong statement. Like it's not even that, like, you're not just innocent. It's you have no capability of being innocent. You could never do anything right.
Yeah.
And that's the sign of a very wicked person.
Indeed.
Like, every step you take is marked by evil at that point.
Yeah, it's like even like the idea of like our own good works, even our own good works are filthy rags before God, right?
Exactly.
I think this next verse is very interesting, and it kind of like it doesn't say directly what it means, but you can kind of like sense like by the tone of what's being said what it means. He says, "For it is from Israel craftsmen made it. It is not God. The calf of Samaria shall be broken to pieces." And like I kind of like sense like this sense of like just irony throughout this. It's almost like God is saying, is like, your God that you made came from some craftsman in Israel, some guy who probably gets paid minimum wage that created a stone.
Yeah.
For you to worship. He's like, that's how powerful your God is. Like,
yeah.
He's like, you want to know how powerful it is? He's like, I'm gonna break it to pieces. Like,
yeah, your God is so powerful that a man had to create it.
Right. There's that whole verse I forget where it's at, but it talks about how like these idols were made by mere men, like by the work of their hands. He's like, and you expect like God to be like that?
Yeah.
That's a paraphrase. That's the Message version.
Boo.
Nope. Get that out of here, my dude.
Can we drop the 666 on him, editor?
Is that a Message Bible? Throw that in the trash, my dude.
I've been reading it for 2 days straight, and there's nothing you can do to stop. Wait, what are you doing?
No one knows what we're talking about. It's great. Anyway. For they sow the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. The standing grain has no heads. It shall yield no flour. If it were to yield, strangers would devour it. What are your thoughts on that one, Josh?
So that first part of verse 7, they sow the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. That verse always strikes me as it's testament to man's arrogance. We always try to conquer something that we never have any idea about without looking at the consequences of it. So this is like the idea of Israel's looking at something that God has obviously said don't do these things. And we're building up something in our sinful nature here. Israel's doing something in their sinful nature. They're building up all of these alliances. They're doing all these sinful things. And in the moment, maybe it's making them prosperous. They're sowing the wind. Like, they're using the wind for something great, sure. Like the idea of a ship being able to harness the wind to be able to sail. But there's a whirlwind coming, and the idea of the whirlwind here, like, it's a hurricane, it's a tornado, it's destructive. And that's what's coming for them. Like, they're not seeing that by taking advantage of this, they're also inviting this other thing to come on. So, yeah, you're using these things, and for the time being, it might be working out for you. But eventually, this other stuff is going to catch up to you. So, you've overlooked the consequences of your actions. The whirlwind will come and destroy everything you've built up. God is that whirlwind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the next part of it is a literal fulfillment of prophecy later on, because it says their grain has no heads, it shall yield no flour. If it were to yield, strangers would devour it. And that just shows like that God kept his promise, like when the exiles were taken by Babylon. And Assyria is like a great famine happened. Like people were starving. Like you see, like people were forced to eat their dead children to stay alive, right?
Yeah.
So this very literally happened. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And any food that did come up, like, strangers would devour it. It wasn't being taken by the Israelites. It was being taken by the military powers to feed their soldiers.
Right. So in the next verse says, Israel swallowed up. Already they are among the nations as a useless vessel.
Yeah, I mean, that one's pretty self-explanatory. Like, Israel seems powerful, but they're already kind of whoring themselves out to these other nations to make these alliances. They don't have any real power.
Right.
So now all of these other nations are kind of just licking their lips. They're laying claim to it already. They're fighting over who gets Israel when they fall. And I think at this point in history, there's already kind of some conflict over that. I think Babylon and Assyria or whoever are already kind of like starting to clash at the border, seeing like, hey, who gets first dibs on this?
Then you have Persia coming in like, haha, that's mine.
Yeah, and then Persia's just like, nope, GG, easy noobs.
Verse 9, for they have gone up to Syria, a wild donkey wandering alone. Ephraim has hired lovers. So I think that just emphasizes like the aspect of like their political reliance, right?
Yeah.
So like they've already gone to Assyria to try to secure their power. In my commentary, it actually says this actually is probably a reference to Hosea's submission to Assyria and his attempt to keep the power that he sees following his murder of Pekah. So you see that actually in 2 Kings 15:30. So if we want to turn there real quick. I know where 2 Kings is, I promise.
2 Kings 15, verse 30.
Right, yep. So, just for some context.
That says, Then Hosea, the son of Elah, made a conspiracy against Pekah, the son of Remaliah, and struck him down, and put him to death, and reigned in his place, in the 20th year of Jotham, the son of Uzziah.
It also says, after that, 17 verse 3, so I can get that one. It says, against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hosea became his vassal and paid him tribute. So
He got spanked.
if you guys want more context, read 2 Kings 15 and 17. But we don't have time to go into all that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but again, it's this idea of reliance on like political powers, not on God. It says, though they hire allies among the nations, I will soon gather them up, and the kings and princes shall soon rise because of the tribute. And this idea of gathering up, a lot of times you see that in a positive connotation, but I don't believe that's positive for this one. I believe it's talking about God's going to gather them up for judgment.
Right. And just real quick, since this is since we're talking so much about the politics here, I just want to throw out like a real quick warning, especially to American Christians, because it's super easy, I think, for American Christians to fall into this trap. I know it's super easy for us as American Christians to mix our politics and our faith. That's a very dangerous trap to fall into. I will say, I think it's wise to allow the Bible to inform which way you may lean politically, but don't let your politics influence the way you read the Bible. And more importantly, as easy as it is to hope that a man can save you, remember, at the end of the day, nobody can save you except for Christ. Voting for the right candidate's not going to fix a country. Voting for the right party is not going to fix a country. Like, people are naturally evil. Now, if the right group of people somehow get in, and those people are a bunch of God-honoring people who want to come together and submit to Christ, then maybe it could happen. 9 times out of 10, human beings are too stupid and too evil to let that happen. That being said, pray for your country, and as much as some of you don't want to hear this, you need to pray for your leaders. Even the ones who aren't Christian, or yes, even the ones who are of the opposite political party of you. And, yeah, I said it. Pray for your leaders, even if they're insert political party here. Ooh, those evil insert opposite political party of me.
Yeah, well, guess what? You were evil too before Christ saved you, so.
Yeah, yeah. But that's just my warning. It's don't let your politics mix with your faith in the wrong way.
Amen.
Because honestly, I think that was a problem that the Pharisees had. If you go back and study the history of that, I think the Pharisees used their religion as a political power more than an actual religious thing. And it became a very dangerous thing for them. And that's one of the reasons why Christ despised them, or despised the way they did things.
Right.
So that's my little soapbox. I'm kicking it out of the way now. Go ahead, write me a death threat in the comments. I know some of the guys from work watch this or listen to it. So this is my shout out to who's somebody I think would actually do this. Brandon Harley, if you're listening to this, if you love me, do me a favor, write me a death threat. Thanks.
but use a pen name, but make it like really unsubtle, like it's obviously you.
Do a Kingdom Hearts thing and just mix up the letters in your last name and throw an X in there somewhere.
Brandon?
I am Brandox. And I'm like, not that subtle, but I like the effort.
So yeah, we got this last section here.
Gotcha.
Finish up here, but it says, because Ephraim has multiplied their altars for sinning, they have become to him altars for sinning. So that's just very interesting, because, Israel built these altars to atone for their sin, but these altars have instead become places where they come to sin, right? Because they're not atoning for their own sin, for the sin to God. They're trying to atone to these other gods that are abominations to God.
Right.
It's like they're just like heaping up God's wrath upon them.
Were I to write for him my laws by the 10,000s, they would be regarded as a strange thing. So, that one's pretty straightforward, too. God is saying, I could write down all of my laws for you guys in plain speech and hand them to you, and you guys would look at these and be like, Like, that's how far away the Israelites have drifted from God at this point. They don't know what righteousness is. They don't know what the way of God is. And we've seen this illustrated multiple times throughout the Book of Kings, even, where they've like explored the temple or something, and it's like, oh, hey, we found this copy of the Book of the Law, and one of the kings would read it and be like, oh, crap, we've strayed so far from God. And, kudos to the good kings who would read the Book of the Law and be like, oh, man, we gotta get back on track. But we've seen this happen multiple times.
Yeah. Sad. It's a sad thing.
Yeah.
Romans talks about how, in Romans 1, that the law of God is plain to unbelievers, but they suppress the truth of their unrighteousness.
Right.
So it's like it doesn't require an interpreter to understand, like, we know right from wrong.
Right.
In verse 13 it says, as for my sacrificial offerings, they sacrifice meat and eat it, but the Lord does not accept them. Now he will remember their iniquity and punish their sins, and they shall return to Egypt. So I think this is just very clearly talking about what we were talking about earlier, is these sacrifices that were ceremonially right weren't right in the heart, right? So,
right.
So God very clearly does not accept them because they have blood on their hands. And it says he will remember their iniquity and punish them for it, as we see happening through the exile.
Yeah.
And, it says they shall return to Egypt. I believe that's more of like symbolic. Like, I don't think he's actually talking about literally going back to Egypt, because there's no record in history of that.
So I think it's symbolic, but it's also kind of like, because it's symbolic, but in a sense it's kind of true, because one of the kings makes an alliance with Egypt.
Right.
Which one was it? I think it was Jehoshaphat, wasn't it?
I think it might have been, yes.
Yeah, but Jehoshaphat makes an alliance with Egypt, so in a sense
Right.
he's returning to Egypt. He goes to them saying, hey, we can't handle this issue on our own, so it's like, you crawled back to Egypt.
Yeah, well, I think like the way I saw this was like the idea I think kind of here is that like Israel when they were in the wilderness like they were crying to like go back to Egypt,
Right.
and God's just like fine, like go back and like go back to slavery like you were,
Yeah.
It's like in a sense like that exile was slavery.
Yeah, so this is almost like a metaphorical Egypt.
Right.
But also in the sense it's like, oh, they kind of did go back to Egypt because you went back to the people who held you in slavery begging for their help.
Yep. Yeah, that did happen. In verse 14, the last verse here.
And it's pretty obvious, for Israel has forgotten his maker and built palaces, and Judah has multiplied fortified cities. So I'm going to send fire upon his cities, and it shall devour her strongholds.
Yeah, and I think very self-explanatory is like they're relying on their own military might, their own strength is like, but these fortified cities can't hold back the wrath of God, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing you can do when God decides that your time is up.
Right.
And yeah, it says here he'll send fire, but we've seen him work through whatever means he wants.
Yeah.
Heck, when Joshua was conquering the land, God was like, oh yeah, just have these guys march around the city and then blow their horns really loud. Logic says that shouldn't happen. God's like, whatever, watch me go. Like, when God says your days are numbered, your days are numbered.
So, with all this in mind, understanding the literal interpretation of this passage, what's one application you would take away from this, Josh? Like for us as a church, maybe if there's any non-believers who are watching this.
I mean, there's a lot that we could take away from this. I mean, I already got on my soapbox about the whole politics thing, which is something I think the whole church in America needs to learn. It doesn't matter who you're going to vote for. Your faith needs to be ultimately in Christ. And honestly, I think that's what the whole point of, that's the whole point of the Bible, obviously, faith in God alone. But I think that's really what Hosea is leaning into with this verse. He's saying, like, hey, look, you can have all of these alliances. You can put your faith in this person or that place, or this person with all this money, this person with all this power, this person with all this military might. But at the end of the day, God's going to break them like a stick. And if you're not on that, if you're not for God, you're his enemy.
Amen.
So my one takeaway would be, make sure you're right with Christ.
Right.
Because it doesn't matter who you're with physically. If you're not with Christ spiritually, none of those people can save you.
I think bouncing off of that too, Josh, it's, like we said earlier, we have all these people saying today, I know God, I know God. You can say that all you want, but does God know you? Right?
Yeah.
You can say you know God all you want, but if you don't have a relationship with a true and living God, you're on sinking sand. You're not on the solid rock that is Christ, right?
Yeah.
So I would just tell you, if you claim to be a Christian, but you're seeking after other gods, and I'm not saying that we don't all fall into idolatry as Christians. We do, because we have this battle between our flesh and the spirit. What I am saying is you cannot live as a Christian and also live for the world at the same time. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So if you're saying you know God, but you're trying to live this life on one side that's indulging sin and loving sin, and then you're trying to say you love God, a house divided cannot stand, right?
Yeah.
So if this describes you, I would say just reevaluate yourself, be honest, and don't try to make excuses and justifications for your sin. Go before God and ask him to cleanse you and to forgive you of your sins, and also to give you a heart that hates sin like he does. Because Jesus promised that, as we go along in our faith and we are sanctified, we will hate sin more and more and love righteousness. We'll be more like him.
Right.
So don't be divided. Don't try to serve one God and then the true God.
Right.
One fake God and the true God, because it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's any better way to say it, and I don't think there's any better way for us to end the episode than with that.
Right.
But with that being said, thank you guys for watching another episode of Undeserving. If you want to get into contact with us, undeserving@gmail.com, undeservingpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook, Undeserving Podcast. What else are we on?
Instagram.
Yeah, we're on Instagram. We never use it, but send us something. We might see it. I don't know.
We decided we're not doing TikTok.
Yeah, I will not do any talking of ticks. No. That's pretty much it, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, so like I said, you want to get in contact with us, prayer requests, ideas for episodes, questions, concerns, death threats. Maybe you want to just tell me you think I'm ugly. Like, hey man, I'll hear it all. Woody will hear it all. I'll have a good laugh about it. Can't wait to hear from you guys. I hope you guys are having a great new year. Hope everybody's staying safe. We're glad to be back with you guys. I've been Josh.
I've been Bryan.
Have a great day. Hey guys, glad you stuck around to see if there was anything worthwhile. We'll try and make it worth your while.
Also, if you want to watch any more videos from the Undeserving podcast, you can click right here or just go on our channel.